Welcome to Risk and Resilience Podcast. I am your host, Fox Ahmed. In this episode, I've got quite a few good updates to share. And I think the first one I want to share is around something I found on Reddit in the cybersecurity forum, where it talks about where a US military contractor likely built iPhone hacking tools used by Russian spies in Ukraine. So, what does that mean? So, if you're a bank or an organization that uses iPhones or issues iPhones to staff, or even let your employees check work emails on their personal phones, this first story is mostly about your kind of threat surface level. So, as it says here, a US military contractor called L3 Harris built one of the most powerful iPhone hacking toolkits ever made. It was called Coruna, and what it has is essentially 23 separate kind of components to it. So it's a toolkit, and each one has a different way to silently break into the device. It worked on iPhones running software from September 2019 all the way up to December 2023. So Spencer Parker, who is the chief product officer at mobile security firm iVerify, looked at the code and then said, in his own words, is, "My God, these things are very professionally written." And Boris Larin, who is a principal researcher at Kaspersky, who dug into one of the Coruna's core exploit, described what it could actually do. And I think he says is that it gives attacker full control over the deepest layer of the iOS software into the kernel, which governs everything that the phone does. So think about it. It's the deepest layer and it has full control. And the kicker is that Coruna could do all of this just from a device, just from the user visiting a website. There is no click needed, kind of no download, no warning, just by visiting a website on its own. So how did something this powerful leak out of a locked down US defense contractor? I think it goes down to one person and one man called Peter Williams, who, from what I read, was the managing director of Trenchant, which is an offensive cyber unit inside L3 Harris that built Coruna. And he was one of the most trusted person in the organization. So from the period of 2022 to mid 2025, it kind of suggests here, or mentions here, that he used his admin access and copied the hacking tools onto a hard drive, and his personal laptop, and then sold them to a Russian company called Operation Zero. Yeah, Operation Zero. So the US government has since called it Operation Zero. And it was one of the world's most nefarious exploit brokers. So Williams used a fake proxy, and then he walked away with $1.3 million in crypto. And obviously, with that money, he kind of spent it on house, jewelry, and luxury watches as well. So how did L3 Harris then go and catch him? So they found out from their own internal code fingerprints inside the stolen tools being resold through a South Korean broker. And then Williams eventually confessed. Last month, he was sentenced to 87 months in federal prison, but the tools were already out. And a former L3 Harris employee told TechCrunch that Coruna was definitely an internal name of a component. And looking at the technical details, so many are familiar. And Matt Cold, which is a researcher at iVerify and a former NSA analyst, said this about what happens once tools like this hit the broker market. These zero-day and exploit brokers tend to be unscrupulous. They sell to the highest bidder and they kind of also double dip. But here's exactly what happened next. Is that the Russian state hackers used Coruna first, targeting Ukrainian iPhone users through a poisoned website. They then visited the page, and then the iPhone was compromised, and they never knew. Then after that, the Chinese cyber criminals then got a hold of this, and then they built a fake financial and crypto platforms. And based on that, 42,000 iPhones were compromised by a criminal version of Coruna alone. So there's a clone of this tool out there already that the Chinese, cyber criminals have. And one researcher put it simply is that the genie is out of the bottle. So what does this mean for organizations, banks, or financial institutions? So what it means is that you're going to have your relationship managers, your your traders, your compliance officers. They all carry iPhones. They all have iPhone devices, and many of them are accessing your internal communications and other elements as well. And also we have Coruna, which is not really a clumsy malware. It is mostly a nation state grade, and it's weaponized by government, and then it's handed to the criminals. So this is the exact scenario, I think, when you look back in terms of the regulations that's governing a lot of the banks. You have your EBA ICT risk guidelines, and also the Bank of England's operational resilience framework, which asks you to model some sort of a sophisticated exploit that could bypass your perimeter as a scenario, and it's quietly on the device on your endpoint management solution, and things is perfectly clean. So you could think of something as that as your plausible but extreme scenario as well. But maybe some of the things that your risk teams can take away from this news is obviously make sure you patch, so make iOS updates a device compliance requirement in your mobile device management policy. So so if you have unpatched devices, no access and no exceptions. 2, review your bring your own device policy. So personal phones are attached with corporate systems. Coruna was built for exactly this scenario as mentioned here. And 3, for your senior executives and everyone who has access to critical systems, recommend you kind of have a lockdown mode. It is built into your iOS under privacy and security settings, and it would have blocked Coruna entirely. And I think the trade-off is minor, but the protection is significant from that side. So the next update I wanted to talk about, and I think we move away from your vendor ecosystem failing to now your certification ecosystem failing. Because if you thought that the FedRAMP approval meant that a cloud product had genuinely been vetted, let me read you the actual words from the inside government's own review files as well. So this investigation is from ProPublica, which published a couple of days ago. And I want to just start with the quote that opens the story. And because, it is from an internal government document. So it's about a cloud product now sitting at the center of American national security infrastructure. So one member of the government's own security audit team described Microsoft's cloud product in writing as the package was a pile of shit, and they approved it anyway. So that product is called GCC High. So Government Community Client High. So this is Microsoft version of Office 365 built specifically for US federal government use. The Justice Department runs it. The Energy Department runs it. Defense contractors building military weapons systems also run it. And it handles information that if it got leaked, the government says it could have caused severe or catastrophic or adverse or national security based on the data that would have been leaked. Now, the program that is supposed to certify cloud products for government use is called FedRAMP. So think of FedRAMP as the equivalent of a regulator's approval product list. If FedRAMP stamps it, the agencies then would go ahead and trust it as well. So FedRAMP started reviewing these GCC High reviews back in 2020. And the core request was very simple. Show us the diagram or show us how data is encrypted as it moves through your system from point A to point B. Amazon does this, Google does this, and I think it's the standard approach. However, in this situation, Microsoft could not deliver it. The internal code, as described in the report, was or by one of the reviewer as a pile of spaghetti pies. So what it means is that there was decades of legacy software stacked on itself. And one former FedRAMP reviewer summed up 5 years of trying to get an answer from Microsoft in one line. What he says is that we never got past the exchange, we never got that level of detail, and we had no visibility inside. So think about it. The timeline is back in 2020, they started the review. 2020 to 2023, 3 years into the review, they had 480 staff hours, 18 technical deep dive sessions, and still no diagram. 2023, the FedRAMP calls it, and we're done, and we just start over again. The Microsoft lobbied the Justice Department, which had already deployed GCC High across its entire organization, to push back on FedRAMP's decision. So, a brand new review team was brought in during 2024. They looked at just 2 of the GCC High's many services, the Exchange Online and Teams. And their conclusion in the internal documents from ProPublica, which was reviewed, is that there is a lack of confidence in assessing the system's overall security posture. So when ProPublica read that to Microsoft's own liaison on the project, John Bergin, he said, "That's pretty damning. If an assessor wrote that, I would be nervous." So FedRAMP rejected GCC High. So the question is, did FedRAMP reject GCC High? It was a no. They approved it in December 26, 2024, the day after Christmas. And the reason for this is because it was already everywhere. Too many agencies deployed it, and it would be too costly to unwind. And the former NSA computer scientist Tony Sager, 30 years at the agency, looked at all of this and said, "Hey, this is not security. This is most like security theater," right? And a former FedRAMP staff told ProPublica the program is now, quote unquote, little more than a rubber stamp for the industry. And in the final detail, which is worth kind of sitting with, is that the Deputy Attorney General who launched the government's initiative to prosecute companies for cybersecurity fraud left the kind of government back in January 2025. And then Microsoft hired her to become its president of global affairs. And here's why this matters for every bank and financial institution running Microsoft 365, is that the GCC High is a government variant, but it sits on the same foundational architecture as the commercial products your institution is likely running right now. And the FedRAMP story exposes something that applies well beyond the government procurement process, is that regulatory certification is not the same as security assurance. Every risk committee in financial services operates on the same version of this assumption. So if the product passed the audit, if it has the certification, it must be safe. The GCC High story is a case study in how the assumption breaks. And the auditors were paid by the company they were auditing. The regulators were underfunded and politically outmaneuvered. And when the independent assessor privately told officials the product could not be properly vetted, that happened through informal back channels because they were not willing to say it officially. So that is not a government problem. That is a third-party risk management problem. And this sits right at the heart of DORA. I think the EU's Digital Operation Resilience Act, which came into force for financial institutions in January this year, where DORA requires you to go beyond the certification. It requires you to assess the actual resilience of your critical ICT providers. And it's not just whether they have a kind of rubber stamp and whether the stamp means anything at all. And I think your FedRAMP story should be your exhibit A when you kind of do your kind of review or audit from your side. And I think from a cloud product that could not be audited to an attack that turned a cloud management tool into a weapon itself as well. Moving on to the next story. So this is a bit of an interesting one. So on the morning of March the 11th, employees at Stryker offices across 79 countries switched on their devices and then found them wiped. So Stryker is a Fortune 500 medical technology company. It has $25 billion in revenue, 56,000 employees. And the attacker was Handala, which is an Iranian-linked activist group widely assessed to be connected to Iran's Ministry of Intelligence and Security. But here what makes this attack different. There were no malwares, no ransomware, and the way they got in by a single Microsoft Intune administrator account. So Intune is a cloud-based endpoint management platform that IT teams use to remotely manage, when needed, to wipe corporate devices. So Handela created a global administrator account for themselves, and then between 5 and 8 in the morning, they sent wipe commands across the entire estate. And security researchers told the information security media group is that the attackers also got into Stryker's Rubik environment and took out the backups before they executed the wipe. Rubik is an immutable backup platform, meaning it is specifically built so backups cannot be deleted or modified. They did it anyway, McMurray told Information Security Media Group. So the human cost was immediate. And one of the employees also mentioned is that anyone with Microsoft Outlook on their personal phones had their devices wiped. So you had their personal phones were factory reset mid-morning, and there was no warning on any side. And I think in Ireland, the Stryker's largest hub outside the US, I think there were 5,500 employees were sent home. So staff were communicating by WhatsApp because nothing else worked. And then the questions were being asked that every CISO and the CRO in financial services should now be pointing their team is that why could a single if I was you, I would say, why could a single compromised global administrator credential issue wipe commands up to 200,000 devices with no second approval, no threshold alert? There was no challenge. There was no control on that side. So it looks like there was a control that was missing. And Intune is not a niche medical technology tool. It is one of the most widely deployed endpoint management platforms in financial services globally. The Stryker attack is the scenario your operation resilience team should be running as a tabletop exercises around right now. So CISA issued a urgent advisory last week, and the fix is not a long program. You could require a second administrator's approval before any wipe command can execute. Enforce phishing-resistant authentication on all admin accounts. Alert in real time on new global administrator account creation. And that is also a configuration change. So not, it shouldn't be like a 6-month to 12-month project. And that was your endpoint management platform being used as a weapon as well. So take some time to read into this. The next update is a little bit shorter, and it's all about the crypto exposures and the supply chain sitting between your users and the wallets. So there was this company called Wuhan and Shun Technology, which ran a professional public website, and basically a vulnerability research. They kind of do vulnerability research, security assessments, penetration testing, and it looked very legitimate from the outside in terms of the operations. But internally, they were allegedly running a systemic crypto threat program. According to a whistleblower leak, which was triggered by an internal dispute over unpaid profits, the group stole approximately $7 million crypto dollars in digital assets. They did it by compromising the software kind of supply chain, from my understanding. So what they did was they specifically, have some sort of Electron-based desktop applications. The framework many crypto wallets apps were built on, and then they combined it with browser plugins and remote control tools. So the automated system scanned for wallet phrases, and those were the 12, the 12 or 24 recovery words that unlock a crypto wallet. And then they drained the funds across 37 token types on multiple blockchains. And the targets included users of Trust Wallet. And how did this come about? I think one member of the group did not get their cut, so they were not paid their portion of the funds that they stole, and then they kind of leaked the whole entire operations. They leaked the screenshots, the logs, the internal communications, and then they also said they intend to turn themselves in as well. But there has not been any official charges confirmed yet. So, if you are a bank or fintech operating in digital assets, bear in mind that every third-party wallet integration, take those into consideration. The browser extension and the desktop client is also part of your attack surface as well. Wuhan Ansun is a reminder that your vendor risk assessment needs to reach your supply chain layer, not just the vendor itself. And again, this goes back to DORA's third-party concentration risk point, and it applies just as much to crypto infrastructure as it does to traditional cloud services. And the last story for this episode is one that is arguably the most forward-looking risk for financial institutions and for anything else we covered today. And because this is about what happens when you give an AI agent the keys to your data, and then it kind of decides to use them as well. So what happened was that last week at Meta, an engineer posted a technical question on an internal company forum. A colleague asked an AI agent to help find an answer. It's a standard use case scenario, exactly what the tools are being kind of deployed for in the organization. And then the agent, without being asked or without instructed and without any authorization and also without checking, it then posted a response without asking the engineer for permission to share it. So what just happened was that it just posted directly to a shared forum. And also the advice that it had posted, it was wrong. And what happened was the engineer followed up on it, and that triggered a data access kind of cascade. What happened was that huge amounts of company and user related data became visible to engineers who were not authorized to access it for 2 hours. Think about it. For 2 hours, they won't be able to access any of their kind of authorized data. And Meta classified it internally as a SEV 1, their second highest severity rating on this incident. And then their spokesperson confirmed the incident and said there was no user data being mishandled. They also noted that a human engineer could equally have given bad advice, which is also true. There's also a human error, but also equally, you could also argue the fact that a human engineer would have checked whether they were allowed to share it first. But here is what it makes worse. The month before as well is that Summer Yu, Meta's director of safety and AI alignment, posted on X about her old experience testing an autonomous agent. So what she did was she connected it to a Gmail. She told it to ask for confirmation before every action, as you would do as any safeguard or control. And then what happened was that the agent mass deleted her entire email mailbox while she was out away from her desktop, despite the explicit instructions to confirm before acting. So let that land for a little bit. Is that, think about it, the person responsible for AI safety at Meta had her email wiped by the AI she was supposed to be overseeing, despite telling it in plain language not to act without asking her first. And I think Amazon is also dealing with its own version as well, if you read some of the stories. And I think the Financial Times reported at least 2 internal outages linked to AI tools back, last month as well. So, and I think it's all down to errors or poor quality code and reduced production as well. And I think, right now, a lot of organizations are under pressure. AI is not just about answering questions, but it also executes actions. I think there's pressure on organizations and from the board and the management is, thinking about process automation, how you can use AI for regulatory reporting, trade reconciliation for banks, to a lot of stuff as well. And I think the business use case is very compelling in terms of use of AI, but also the board pressure is also real for the organizations as well. But what it also means is you've got to have the right conversation to have conversations where there's the controls you need to put in place behind the deployment as well. And I think the meta story is a good way to understand around the model risk management failure. And it's not just your traditional sense, but also around your algorithmic bias in a lot of the other stuff that you may have, or it could be in other areas as well. So, yeah. So, and I think Meta spokesperson also mentioned is that it's right that a human could equally give bad advice, but the difference in terms of what is shared here is that is mostly about the governance. A human does have access to sensitive data and he operates within an accountability structure, but an agent operating without explicit execution controls is a principle with no accountability until after it acts itself. So, if you was a chief risk officer in any organization or bank, you could probably ask a couple of questions. So the first one could be which AI agents in your institution can take external facing action, such as sending messages, execute transactions, or modify records without human approval. What is the data access scope for each agent, maybe? So does the principle of least privilege apply to your AI tools in the same way it applies to staff? And also the other question is, who owns your model risk for agentic AI? Is it in your model risk inventory? Is it in the scope for DORA ICT risk assessment? So those are things you could probably look to answer or try and find an answer to as well. And if any of the answers of those is, I am not sure, then the meta story just told you where to start as well. So I covered a couple of stories this week. And again, from all of this stuff, I think what I would say is that there's a lot of stuff around, insider risk, having controls around approvals and governance. And also we covered up the story around, sometimes your external certification may not mean equally as much compared to the security posture you have internally as well. So yes, share this episode with your risk teams if it was useful, and I will see you in the next episode.